I've been reflecting on the state of modern conservatism. It doesn't make sense that while conservatives have the truth about the God of the Bible, and conservatives are right when they promote free markets as the only economic system that can eliminate poverty, they still have been losing the culture wars to the left for almost 100 years. What's missing? Then I had my light bulb moment. Conservatives don't understand social movements? My mind was blown. Let me take a step back and define my terms. A social movement is defined as an organized effort by a group of people or group of organizations with a shared identity working to bring about or impede social, political, economic, or cultural change. Here are a couple of examples that everyone should recognize. The feminist movement, the civil rights movement, the pro-choice movement, the marriage equality movement, the environmental movement, and more recently, the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter are all examples of social movements. Effective social movements have several things in common. Social movements are designed to help their constituents make sense of the world. They are aspirational and inspirational, and they're multi-generational. Basically, social movements are the religion of the left. Social movements are the framework that have fueled the left's 100-year transformation of American society. Let that sink in. Unfortunately, conservatives tend to frame issue-based arguments. Subjects like defeat the tax increase. While no one likes taxes, the subject is hardly powerful enough to be multi-generational and doesn't qualify as inspirational or aspirational, and certainly it doesn't help constituents make sense of the world. Okay, don't get demoralized. There is some good news. I'm going to explore the power of social movements a lot more in upcoming episodes. I'm going to address issues like why Black America is the fastest growing segment of the school choice community, how to afford private school, the power of microschooling, why 600,000 government school teachers have exited the classroom. And I'm going to explain why CRT has already won. This show is going to explore how Christians can leverage the school choice movement to reverse the worst outcomes of the previous social movements and replace government programs as a tool to defeat poverty. Joining me today, we have two rock stars in the school choice advocacy movement. We have Chandra Hendren with Americans for Prosperity and James Franko with Kansas Policy Institute. We're going to start with Chandra. You're with Americans for Prosperity. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing for school choice advocacy in Missouri.
Sure. First off, I'm very excited to be here, Lisa, and that you're doing this podcast. I think it's wonderful to raise awareness. I'm with Americans for Prosperity. We are the policy arm of Stand Together. Our job is to make policy change happen, and education is one of our top priorities. Without education opportunity, kids can't succeed in life. They need that step up. And so we are just very excited to be focusing very heavily on making sure that every child has a chance to succeed and get a step up in life.
And I know that you guys are doing that because we worked together.
Yes, it's been great. I love that symposium we did. It was good.
I know. So I'm going to pivot over to James Franko with Kansas Policy Institute. You've been in the game for a long time, James. Tell us what you guys are working on and what's your goal?
Right. So KPI has existed for almost 3 decades now in one form or another. We've changed names a couple of times, but in our current iteration for about 15 years. And a lot of our job is just keeping folks in Topeka, of whatever political party or no political party for that matter, honest when it comes to how they're actually making life better for working Kansans, making Kansas a better place to live and to work and to raise a family. Lower regulations, less taxes, and anytime you're talking about state policy, you have to talk about education, right? It's the most important thing that any state does, let alone in Kansas. It's half the state budget, let alone what we spend, at the local level or what's coming in from the feds. So when we talk about tax policy, regulatory policy, what have you, a lot of it, almost all of it ends up coming back to educational opportunity. And that's why we've been talking about school choice for decades, even before I arrived. And that's why it's a pleasure to be here with you all today, hear about a little bit what Missouri's up to, and probably end up talking about what some of our neighbors have done over the last couple of months, or even a couple of years with passing universal school choice programs, which is ultimately where all of us want to get, is so that every kid has an opportunity. It's not just these programs that are good, but need to be expanded and eligible for more and more kids.
Right. So when you're talking about something that's 50% of the state budget,
right,
you can't make a move without it being impacted by K through 12 education.
No, that's right. And so much of it, it's not just about the dollars and cents, although that's important. It's about the actual individual kiddos. And I'm sure we'll get into this over the course of the next little bit. Despite lots of everybody's best effort, there's just not enough opportunity for those kids to succeed. And that's ultimately what everybody cares about, is seeing that those kids have the opportunity to go out and flourish in their lives as they grow up.
Right. So today we want to drill down on some tangible policies that have taken place on both sides of the state line.
Right.
So in Missouri, you recently passed the MoScholars program. Can you summarize that for us?
Yeah, so this was exciting. In 2021, the Missouri legislature passed basically our first shot at this, first attempt. It's called the MoScholars program. And so people can donate to an education assistance organization, an EAO, and they can get up to 50% of their state tax liability written off from this donation. And then these EAOs will then distribute that out in the form of scholarships to students, families with financial need, and also students on an IEP. So this is a great first start. It's very new in Missouri, but it's wonderful that we've started this, and we really hope to work to expand it so more children can have the opportunity to parents can choose where their child goes, like what education is best. Every child is different, so let's let parents make that decision on where they get that education.
Okay, so in 2019, Missouri passes the MoScholars program. 2021, Missouri passes the MoScholars program. But Kansas goes back a little further.
Right.
So when did Kansas pass the program?
We passed the initial program, and ours doesn't have a nice, clean name like the MoScholars. It is the TCLIS, or the Tax Credit for Low-Income Student Scholarship Program. It just really rolls off the tongue.
Right.
Right. We passed it in 2014, and it was smaller. It was almost something like a pilot program. And then it got tweaked a couple of different times over the intervening years, and now kids up to 250% of poverty can receive a scholarship. The acronyms are a little bit different than the program in Missouri, but it's functionally, it seems like very, very similar to where anybody with a state tax liability can donate to one of these nonprofits. That nonprofit then in turn gives scholarships for kiddos to attend a private school of their choice. Some basic, good governance type restrictions, but that's really it. It's pretty light touch regulatory wise. And ultimately it's about giving each of those kids the opportunity to find the right educational fit. And we believe that parents should be in the driver's seat of that. It shouldn't just be based on your zip code, right? So that way, if this kid wants to go to an Acme school and this one wants to go to this other academy, like it's ultimately the parents who get to choose, not just based on your zip code.
Okay, so on both sides of the state line, the programs don't work the way people would necessarily think they would work. There's not just the parents and the schools involved, there's a third party involved, and that's the business community. The business community can get the tax credit to adjust their tax liability, correct?
Right. In Kansas, it's anybody with an income tax liability. So it's not just businesses.
Individuals.
Right.
So, and then there's some nepotism protections. This isn't supposed to be an individualized tax credit like what Oklahoma just passed, where I get a credit for sending my kids to a private school. It's if I in my charitable or philanthropic giving at whatever level, right? It could even be a few bucks, right? Let alone larger amounts. I donate to these nonprofits, and they're designated. There's about a dozen of them in Kansas. And then I get a credit on my taxes when I go
and
pay.
that's the same here in Missouri too.
Right,
So.
the same thing. So so it's not just the business community, it's anybody with a tax liability, with a state tax liability.
And a business can use that opportunity,
Yes.
but an individual
Yes,
can
that's
as
right.
well. So it's an option for everyone to help kids and get some of their state taxes written off.
Right.
So if someone's driving around listening to this podcast and they have a tax liability in Kansas or Missouri, one of the ways to have that adjusted is to donate to one of the nonprofits on either side of the state line that are helping with the scholarship program, and then they can eliminate those tax liabilities.
Not eliminate. I mean,
Reduce.
it depends on how much of a detail you want to get into onto that side of things, which I'm happy to do. So in Kansas, the credit is worth 75%.
Okay.
So if you donate $1, you're going to get 75% off of your state taxes,
Okay.
right? And because we are, on state line, essentially, right, or very close to it, I'm guessing that people who have liabilities in both states would be able to contribute both to the Missouri Scholars
There you go.
Program as well as one of the programs in Kansas, because there's enough people with interests on either side of the city that they'd be able to, lower their tax liabilities wherever. And again, ultimately to help kids achieve their goals.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And
So-
Missouri is up to 50% of your state tax liability.
Okay, so I just want the individuals
We'll work on it.
the individuals who may not think, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with
Yeah.
me because I'm not a parent or I don't have anyone in school right now. There's still a way for them to affect policy.
Yeah, and they can help out. Like, for example, today, we're here at the Herzog Foundation, and they are one of the EAOs that can distribute that scholarship money to students and help kids. And so they can donate to an organization like Herzog, and then kids can receive that benefit. So,
So everyone
and there's
listening,
several organizations like this. So.
look into this program, and MoScholars in Missouri and the Kansas Tax Credit,
We'll let you roll that out
Low Income
there,
Tax
really.
Credit Scholarship Program. Look into it because you can impact an individual child's life, whether or not you're a parent or have someone in the school district right now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to fast forward to COVID. COVID seemed like it was a bit of a bombshell that went off in the school choice movement. So we find ourselves in 2020. We find that a lot of the schools were getting shut down. Parents didn't know where to turn. And it seemed like it poured a little bit of gasoline on the school choice movement. Is that something that you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the longest time, and I'm sure it's the same way in Missouri, it's the same way everywhere, it's the folks who can afford it have school choice. They can choose to dip into their own pocket to privately educate or to homeschool, or they can move to a district where they think that the public schools are better, or better suited to their child at the very least, right? But then after COVID, or through COVID, with shutdowns and everything that came from that, you saw parents faced with the reality that, oh wow, this isn't what I thought I was going to get, right? And it just absolutely stepped on the accelerator of trends that were already ongoing. You had already seen increases in private school enrollment, homeschooling, all of these different things, but it just absolutely stepped on the accelerator of all of those trends, and now we're just blowing the top off of it with universal school choice programs. Again, 3 of our neighboring states have universal school choice now. And Missouri and Kansas will get there too.
I hope so. We will.
We will. No, there's no hope. We will.
We will.
We will.
We will.
It's just a matter of time.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
numbers that I saw, I just wanted to put something
Oh,
else
yeah.
to you. The numbers that I saw is that we're up to 34 states right now that have meaningful school choice legislation. And we went over the majority of states during COVID. So how did that impact what you guys were doing?
Well, COVID was really, I call it like the mom's wake up moment, like a family's moment. They learned, with whether they were doing virtual school and they heard what was going on in the classroom, and they thought, well, why is my kid there all day? And they just finished all their work in just this very short period of time. Or they learned, I've even heard from some moms saying, my child was never racist, and then they've started saying, bringing up racism and saying, Mom, you can't do this. This person's skin is this color. I'm racist because this, and the parents this is crazy. What's going on with my child? But because of COVID, all of a sudden, people have realized I need to be more involved in my child's education. I want to be more involved. There's options out there. You have your early adopters, like James brought up, people who homeschool, who have the financial means to do private school with these alternative types of education to help their children, but not everyone can afford that. And someone once told me, you can't really have true choice unless you have the financial means to do that. And there's a lot of truth to that statement. And so what we're trying to do here in Missouri, and like you said, there's so many states after COVID, during COVID, who have realized, it's time to expand and allow parents to have more choice in where these tax dollars that they're paying for education go. And in Missouri, we're definitely working on that in every way we can. And I know you are in Kansas. Right. Let's help kids. Let's fund kids and help parents be in the driver's seat and choose how their child is educated and where they go, and just have more of a say. Parents have different preferences for education. Most are probably going to prefer public school because it's convenient, it's easy. I think when they opened up, if I remember correctly, more school choice in Florida, only like 10% of families, ended up transferring out of the public school district, and that's fine. Every parent, but they need to have that option. And currently, we don't have enough options. We can go to the grocery store, and we have a plethora of options. What kind of soap do you want to buy? But education, there are not that many options, and we need to expand that. It's time we made that change.
Exactly.
And two just quick thoughts on that is one, we saw achievement actually increase in Florida. Florida's had pretty robust school choice in lots of different forms for, almost a quarter century now, back to the late 90s. And public school achievement increased as well. So even though, to Chandra's point, most of the kids stayed in public schools, the ones who left, great, that was the choice that their family made. The overwhelming majority, 90+%, stayed there, and their achievement increased as well, which is ultimately what all of us care about, is good education for the kids, regardless of whether it's in a high-performing public school or a charter or a homeschool or a private school or a learning pod or whatever else it is, right? The goal is good education. And anything that's not that should be a secondary or third level or fourth order concern. The point is a good education for every kid.
So the competition was helpful across the board, no matter what building you were sitting in?
As a general rule, yes, because you saw achievement increase. The National Assessment for Educational Progress, I'm not the data geek on KPI's team, right? But it's the best way to compare across states, right? Because Missouri's state assessment's different than Kansas's and all those types of things. But the NAEP scores, absolutely the best way to compare across states, and Florida's scores have skyrocketed, whereas in Kansas, despite spending gobs more money than we did 25 years ago, are remarkably flat and tragically low.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that from Kansas. But one of the goals that I have, and you guys know my background, so I'm transparent that I came from the left, and I spent 2 decades of my life believing what I was told on the left. And so what I found when I started exploring this issue was that I was believing a lot of myths. So I want to review some of the myths they have about school choice. So if you're a parent right now, you're driving around, you're listening to this show, and you believe that school choice only benefits the rich, what do you say to that myth about school choice?
Yeah, and I've heard that before as well, but historically speaking, school choice programs are designed to benefit the low-income minority groups first. Because it's harder for them to, have more options. For example, in Missouri, the MoScholars program that we have, which is our only type of school choice program, is geared towards low-income families. And I'm grateful for that. And ideally, I would love for every family to be able to choose, whatever option is best for them. But for the, say for the most part, if not entirely speaking, and you can tell me if that's any different in Kansas, but school choice programs are geared towards those who need it most first.
And so how much is the MoScholars program? How much does that credit go up to?
Yeah, they can get up to if I remember the number right, $6,328 to go towards it could be a private school, different school of their choice. So yeah,
can you use
a good
that one for homeschooling?
In the MoScholars program, I'll have to go look for all the details. Like you said, I'm not always the data person. There is a way for some to use that towards some homeschooling, but there's certain restrictions on that. So it's not completely open, like a full, money follows the child type program. But there is there is a way to get some assistance. Just have to follow the specific guidelines there.
Okay, and so for our audience, I know it's MoScholars.org, so everyone can go to that website and they can get the full program on MoScholars.org.
And they can also reach out to an education assistance organization too and find more details there as well. So.
Of which Herzog is.
That's correct.
Herzog is. And so the amount in Kansas.
$8,000 per kid.
$8,000.
Up to $8,000. Well, ours is easy. We don't have those decimal places. So ours is up to $8,000 a kid, which covers tuition at most private schools in the state, not all. The actual scholarship amounts are less. It's $3,000 and some change on average across the state. But it's $8,000 per kid on the value of the scholarship itself, and it only is allowed to go to kind of a brick and mortar private school.
Okay.
No homeschooling, no micro schools. In Kansas, the way the law is written is that the receiving schools have to be accredited either by the state or one of about 24 different non-governmental accrediting bodies. Half of them are religiously affiliated and the other half are secular. So the private schools in the state have a broad latitude to go out and find the accrediting body if they want to participate that fits their mission or not. And all of these programs are completely voluntary. Okay. If the school doesn't want to do it, if the family doesn't want to do it, there's no requirements here. We would be opposed to those kind of things. The point is to give opportunity, not to give shackles to people to further limit their educational options.
And in Missouri, that has to go towards a program that's accredited as well. So.
Okay. So let me jump onto another big myth that I believed when I was on the left as far as school choice goes. I was told that school choice steals money from government schools. Can you respond to that?
Well, first off, I think that's the wrong question to go about it for me personally to ask, to think about. But to your point, every state set it up differently, and I'm curious how it is in Kansas too. But oftentimes, if there is a program set up, people will say, we're going to all the federal dollars are still going to the school, or even some of the state dollars, just a certain percentages offset here. So it sounds like that is there too. So. But really the question we're asking is, are we choosing, as a society, do we want to choose one specific type of education system to promote at the expense of all others? Are we saying that one's the best? I had the opportunity, on a quick tangent, I've had the opportunity to work with a few different state legislators, and I've had people come in my office and say, public school administrators, and say public schools are the best way to teach kids. I've had private school administrators come in saying private schools are the best. I've had homeschool groups come in and say homeschooling is the best. I've had charter school groups come in and say charters are the best way to educate a child. And there are great public schools. There are failing public schools. Homeschooling can be done exceptionally well. It can be done poorly. Charter schools can be great. I've also seen failing charter schools as well. Private schools can be wonderful. Some aren't as good as others too. So from my perspective, there's no one education system that is better than another. What we need to be thinking about is, let's fund kids and let kids achieve and excel. And so when we ask that question, it's like, oh, we're afraid, we don't want to lose dollars to this institution, but we're really saying, I think this is the best way to educate every single child. But anyone who knows a child, every child is very different. And they learn differently, and they have a different way of learning for us to reach them and teach them and help them achieve what they need to in life. And so that was a tangent there, I'm sorry, but I think that that's the wrong question. The right question is, how can we best help children succeed? Don't focus on, I need to fund this institution, let's fund the child and let the families be in the driver's seat.
Exactly, and that's what I was able to arrive at. Basically, what's failing is one size fits all.
Exactly.
Literally, we have 50 million students in pretty much one size fits all model, where everything else in America is a buffet. We have a buffet of cars we can choose from, a buffet of phones we can choose from, a buffet of restaurants we can choose from. So we just want to create a buffet of school options that we can choose from.
Exactly.
I think that's right. And I've got lots of things I couldn't agree more. But just on part of the point is, I'm sure my mom was a public school teacher. I graduated from, public schools in Kansas. Again, lots of people felt called to that space. That is their vocation. It is what they are called to do. But no one system's going to fit each kid well, right? We have 3 kids, and they're very, very different. Even with being raised by the same mom, the same dad, the same house, right? They're just different kiddos. So their educational needs are going to be a little bit different. And we shouldn't be focused on the money being taken from public schools. It's who does that money belong to, ultimately. And it's not the schools. It's not even the state. The money is paid into the state by those parents, by those families, by the businesses in our communities. And that money should go to serve the educational, the constitutionally in Kansas, it's the educational interests of the state, right? And yes, that's going to mean public schools and they should be high performing. But it's going to be serving those individual kiddos wherever they can best see the opportunity, not just shoving everybody into a one size fits none or one size fits very few kind of a system.
Perfect.
Exactly.
So I want to pivot to a segment that I'm calling School Choice in the News.
Okay.
So we're going to listen to this little clip that's coming out of Baltimore, and then I'm going to want to get a little bit of feedback from you about, what's going on.
Okay.
Sounds good.
A local chapter of the NAACP says parents with children in failing schools want more options for better education. Project Baltimore's Chris Papps explains the most recent state test scores in Baltimore County show us just how many failing schools there are.
We're in serious trouble.
Ryan Coleman, the president of the Randallstown chapter of the NAACP, knows numbers don't lie.
When you're talking about the math scores, these open up all type of careers in a lot of different areas that you're blocked. You won't go into them if you're not proficient in math. And we're seeing our children, especially children of color, having these issues.
Coleman is responding to what Project Baltimore just told him. We analyzed the most recent state test scores released last month, and we found 27 schools in Baltimore County had 5% or fewer of the students test proficient in math. 27 schools.
So Chandra, you want to react to what you just saw?
Sure. First off, it's appalling that children are graduating, coming out of any education system with this kind of performance. It's very tragic for them. But I would add that it's not limited to Baltimore. I would say even in Missouri, we can have the same issue. I brought a group of parents and families and students to the Capitol one session to lobby for education freedom, school choice, and we were in a senator's office and visiting with her chief of staff. And we were trying to encourage him to ask the senator to support school choice. And he said, well, she has great schools in her district, so she does not support school choice. And a lady there stood up and said, that's not right. I graduated from an inner city public school, and the students that I graduated with, most of them had a 4th grade math proficiency. And that is not right. And she may have good public schools in her district, but her vote affects me, affects someone like me. It could have given someone like me the chance to have a better education and to succeed as well as my friends. And that's always stuck with me because I remember that passion that she had and that tragedy of, well, there might be good schools, but what about those kids in those schools that aren't doing well? Can they get out? Is there another way? Is there another way? And so the story in Baltimore is, I'm glad you're showing this and bringing awareness to that. That needs to change. And I think we have the answers to do that and to help those kids.
So I really love what you just said there as far as the legislator who had a bit of a blind spot, because again, one of the reasons I'm here is that I had all of those blind spots. And coming from Kansas, I graduated from the #1 school in the state of Kansas according to KPI rankings. So I had the same blind spot. I thought, well, I had a great education, and isn't everyone else getting what I'm getting?
Right. So as a quick aside, our rankings on that are simply from the State Department of Education assessment data, right? This isn't us, mixing it up and just seeing what it spits out or picking our favorites. We take state assessments and just translate those into a way that's easy for people to understand, A through F, just like your kid brings home a report card, right? Okay. So with that being said, there are lots of great public schools. Right? I went to one of them. It worked for me. It worked for my brothers. We've gone on to live, rich, full lives, but not everybody has that opportunity. To make this a cross-state line discussion, my parents moved from Kansas City, Missouri, to what was then very, very rural southern Johnson County because they had the opportunity to do so. Frankly, they could afford it. Back in the 1970s when Blue Valley schools were one high school and it was a small rural district. because they had that opportunity. So there are lots of great schools, but not everybody can afford to do that. And in Kansas, maybe it's from the KCK public school district to one of the Johnson County districts, because Johnson County is the big leafy suburb that everybody points to as great schools. It's not to say there aren't great schools in KCK or Sumner Academy or something like this as well, right? But the numbers are pretty tragic when it actually comes to proficiency levels. Those same numbers they're talking about in Maryland, the same things that you experience in Missouri, it's the same things that you experience in Kansas. And arguably what's even sadder than just the low proficiency itself is the gaps in achievement between, depends on which exam you want to look at and how they cut the pie, but it's between higher income kiddos and low income kids, or between white students and African American or Hispanic kids. And it's not because they can't learn, right? It's because they haven't been given those same opportunities. And the data that they showed from the NAACP polling backs up the polling that we've seen in Kansas when we've polled statewide as well. 60% of folks support the idea across partisan and ideological lines, however, again, you want to cut it. 60% of Kansans support the idea that the money should follow the kid. This is not an issue of maybe what we would have thought it would have been before COVID, let alone 15 or 20 or 30 years ago. This is something that parents and families and communities support. It's just about overcoming, the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, when it actually comes time to voting on things in the State House.
Okay, so one of the reasons I was really attracted to that video is because, and this was evidence when Chandra and I worked together, that we were able to bring together non-traditional partners. And so when you see the NAACP saying that the majority of their membership is supporting school choice, I think that's really an opportunity to start reaching out to non-traditional partners. Have you been seeing any non-traditional partners come into the movement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I grant you the non-traditional framing of that question, because they're not typically people that work with, frankly, fiscally conservative outfits, but we all share the same goal, which is kids, right, and educational opportunities. So some of our strongest advocates have been, folks who operate small rural schools, private schools, where, in the rural communities, the biggest employer, a big part of the town's culture is the public school. We've found Holy Savior Catholic Academy in urban Wichita, Kansas, right? Most of the kiddos who are there actually aren't Catholic students, but the school and the church are there because they're Catholic, because they're mission driven. They're educating those folks. Those are the ones up here in KCK, same kind of an idea with, urban core folks who are advocating for choice, because those are the ones, unfortunately, who maybe need more assistance because they can't just uproot their families. They don't have the jobs that they want, the opportunities that many of us were provided. So it's about that opportunity, and those people are happy to come and advocate for kids. Okay, so the Overton window is moved. This is now mainstream. School choice is now a mainstream belief system in the electorate. I would even say there's been some new, polling studies have come out too, even just last month, demonstrating that both majority of Democrats and Republicans want options. They want things like open enrollment in public schools. They want school choice. Almost 70% of Americans want education options. Okay. And that is huge. I mean, that's something that's really happened. Like we talked about COVID at the beginning. I think that really was a tipping point for education. And since then, people have realized we need options. And this is one of the only places in the suite of government programs to where up till this point you haven't had choice. Right. If you're on Medicare or Medicaid, yes, not all doctors have to take you, but you can go out and you can find your own doctor, right? People who go to college on, a Pell Grant or student aid, of one sort or another, they can pick whatever school, that will accept them when it comes to higher ed, be it, a technical education or a four-year university, private, public, whatever. But K-12 is one of the only places where this kind of no, you're going to eat this based on your zip code and you don't really get a choice, is one of the only places where that, up till this point, that kind of a framework has existed, and it's unfortunate. So I want to drive that point home because that's huge for me, and I frame the conversation in terms of this zip code system a lot. I call it zip code jail. So the zip code system is unique to America, I found out. And again, multiple other government programs. If you are on a Section 8 voucher,
You can take your Section 8 voucher into the open marketplace with any landlord that's willing to work with you. They don't tell you it has to be within certain zip codes. If you are attending preschool, and you can choose any preschool that will accept even your state voucher for preschool. So this is still education, preschool. You can go to any school you want. You're not zip code based. You can get student loans. You can get Pell Grants. You can get financing for seminary education using government programs. Is that correct?
Up until the point with the seminary, my understanding, and I could be wrong, when I think of or hear folks talk about Pell Grants and whatnot, because this gets to the idea of the Establishment Clause, and I'm not an attorney, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express or anything like that last night, right? Is that you could use, student loan to go to Benedictine College, right? Just right across state line, Catholic institution for your undergraduate, no questions asked. I don't know, and I don't believe so, that you can then use it to go to seminary. But maybe there's something else that I'm not aware of in that regard. But the fundamental point still holds. Food stamps, all the programs you just listed, all of these things, you can take that money, you can take that money and use it to serve your family's needs. But again, up until this point in in schools, in education, you haven't been able to do that.
Just K through 12, and that's what I just wanted to drive home.
And even Laura Kelly used some of the federal money that was coming into the states through the pandemic to establish the KEEP program that allowed families to use that money in whatever kind of institution, public or private, to overcome learning loss. So this idea,
we had this close the gap grant.
Yes, yeah, same thing. Every state has them in one sort or another, but even a governor who's opposed to school choice vehemently, right, acknowledges that this is the reality. It's just that when it comes time to doing it in a bigger way that helps more students, thus far she hasn't wanted to support that.
So I just want to speak to people who thought the way that I used to think, that this is unique. This isn't the norm as far as government policies go. Point. And it almost bordered on age discrimination. So if I'm 5 and under, I can use government funds to go to whatever school I want. And if I'm 18 and above, I can use government funds to go to whatever school I want. I'm only locked into this zip code system from K through 12. And it's reminiscent of segregation. So that's why I started calling it zip code jail or zip code segregation. So if you're listening right now and you're claiming that you want to help minorities in particular break out of the legacies of slavery and segregation, then school choice is the issue you should be supporting.
Yeah, and why should your zip code determine your success in life?
Exactly.
When we're in America and we believe in opportunity and the free market.
I like that point, Chandra. I agree. Correct. So I want to do a quick wrap up, and I'm calling this a strategic response. Herzog, we specifically are advocating for Christian education, so I want to run some numbers by you. Right now there's about 99,000 government schools in America and 330,000 churches in America. With 50 million students in K through 12, if every church opened up a micro school, the schools would be about 151 students. So what response are you getting from churches in particular as far as your school choice advocacy?
Well, I know that there are a lot of, I would say there's a movement for people starting new schools. A lot of types of new schools. I mean, people can get really creative. I mean, as long as their academics are sound, people learn in so many different ways. So I think promoting religious institutions offering education. Churches have been educating students for hundreds and hundreds of years. They can do it very well. As far as I would just say AFP in Missouri, Americans for Prosperity, our push is that we would like money to follow the child, for parents to be in the driver's seat and for them to pick whatever institution of learning they feel like will best meet the needs of their child. I was meeting with someone, just real quick, a former legislator, and he said, I felt like I was losing my kids, and again, I don't want to bash on any type of one education, but in this case, the schools that his kids were in weren't great. And so he took his children and they put them both in two different private schools, and he said, I don't have a whole lot of their college funds right now, but I have my kids back, and they're learning well, and they're excelling. And so he found different options for them. They both needed different things, And that's fine, but they're excelling and achieving, and they are happy and doing well. And so that's what we're pushing, is that parents be in the driver's seat. And let's, here in Missouri, and I know you're thinking the same in Kansas, like we want to work together. Let's let kids be our number one priority. Let's fund kids.
Okay, and then one of my goals, as I've said, I'm crystal clear, is that I'm challenging churches to open schools in their buildings. Are you getting positive responses from churches in particular?
Yes, we are. And similar, we don't want to fund any institution, right? What we want to fund is kids.
Right.
And if that money follows that kiddo to a Lutheran school or a Baptist school or a Catholic school, or to a completely secular school, or a school that I've gotten to know over the last couple of months in Wichita that specifically serves kiddos with autism, right? It's a completely secular school, but I know, faith-based folks who send their kids there because those kids are incredibly talented in seeing the potential of those kids and reaching them. And as we've gotten, just like every other state and community, more into the micro school and the learning pods and things like this since the pandemic, a lot of those are being founded in religious institutions and in churches and synagogues and all sorts of other places as well, to where you realize, hey, maybe we've got a few families here that have a few kids each, and all of a sudden you've got 20, 25 kids. That's more than enough, to go out and find a good qualified teacher and educate them in a way that follows the dictates of that family's beliefs.
So I want to thank Chandra and James for joining me on my inaugural episode of Schools Out. Listen to Schools Out wherever you currently stream your podcasts.